Today is the 9th of July, 2005. I'm in Mali, in West Africa, where I've come to see the biggest mud building in the world. The great Mosque of Djenné, an astonishing sight. Driving up here yesterday, the mobile phone rang, and I heard that 7 bombs had exploded in London that morning. Hundreds were injured, scores were dead. The handiwork, probably, of Al-Qaeda. Among the stations that were bombed was the one my daughter uses to go to school. I spent a horrible couple of hours battling with lousy phone connections, finding out she was all right. You think dark things at moments like that, and I fretted about this film. Was it right to be making it? It's about the wonders of Islamic art, but was that still an appropriate subject? I knew the answer long before I arrived here and saw that. I had just spent months and months crisscrossing the Islamic world, and everywhere I'd been, I'd seen fascinating and beautiful things. Some of the most fascinating and beautiful things I had ever seen, made by fascinating, beautiful people who had never shown me anything but kindness, friendship, and hospitality. Not to have made this film would have been utterly dishonest. There's something over there I wanted to show you. We're coming at it from an unusual angle from the back, but you'll recognize it straight away when you see it. It's a beautiful example of Islamic art. Perhaps the most beautiful example of all. Rather like a typical Islamic work of art, the real story of Islam is sparkling, fascinating, complicated, and gorgeous. And the best way to tell it is not with scary interviews and politics. That's just news. The winds of time will blow all that away. The truest evidence that any civilization ever leaves behind about itself is its art. Art never lies. It didn't lie about the Greeks, it didn't lie about the Romans, and it certainly doesn't lie about Islam. Ah, the Taj, the Taj. The most beautiful building in the world? Of course it is. So beautiful and so Islamic. There are various stylistic features to enjoy about the Taj that make it typically Islamic. The love affair that's going on here with simple, gleaming geometry. No other religion has ever trusted geometry as profoundly as this. This sense of perpetual decoration, of saying it with flowers. And all this sensuous calligraphy, words turned into art, quotations from the Quran, an Islamic speciality. But there's something else, something that unites all Islamic art from nation to nation across the centuries like a superglue. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it the atmosphere of paradise. You can see what I mean immediately. It's that air of delicate, God-given perfection, of dreams fulfilled and divine tranquility. It's unmissable and so, so desirable. How Islam developed this addictive appetite for paradise, when, where and why it was developed is quite a story. It's our story. Islam emerged in some of the world's hottest and least hospitable places. Its creators were desert people. Its moods were desert moods. And to get a feel for its art, I suggest we consider the desert dweller's relationship to an oasis. Islam has its own calendar. Day 1 of this calendar marks the departure of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam's founder, from Mecca, where he was born, and his arrival at the oasis of Medina, where he settled and built himself a very significant house. The Prophet didn't select the exact spot for his new house himself. He left the choice to his camel, which, guided by Allah, stopped at some open land owned by 2 orphaned brothers. The Prophet purchased this land, and on it he built his new dwelling. When asked to explain this simple choice, he said, "A man is where the saddle of his camel is." The land had some palm trees on it, which Muhammad cut down, and he marked out a typical Arabian dar, a walled courtyard made of mud bricks, much like these, except a lot bigger. It was square, 50 metres by 50 metres, and it had these humble dwellings along the edges, and the walls were about 10, 11 feet high, like these are. On the edge of the courtyard, the Prophet built some huts for his wives. Modest, mud brick structures with palm roofs. At the centre, he dug a well. And later, when his followers complained of sitting in the exposed sun, he gave them shelter, a simple portico of palm tree columns covered with palm leaves. The first mosque. Every mosque that came afterwards is descended architecturally from this simple, rustic arrangement of the Prophet's house in Medina. And there's something else that the house in Medina bequeathed to all subsequent mosques, and that's its communal air. These Middle Eastern courtyards have so many roles. It's where the animals are tethered, it's where the washing's done, it's where food is cooked. It's where the Prophet preached to his followers, and where sometimes the followers would stay overnight in the shade of the portico. And this sense of a community going about its business behind protective walls was another of the great gifts to the future of the Prophet's dwelling. The mosque began its marvellous and busy history, not as a temple or a daunting place of worship, but as a home. Originally, at prayer times, the community would turn to pray in the direction of the holy city of Jerusalem. But then, one momentous night, the angel Gabriel came to the Prophet in a dream and showed him Mecca. He actually saw the city through a miraculous gap in the vista. And from that moment, the orientation of every mosque was changed and turned to Mecca. The direction of Mecca is marked by the mihrab, a niche in the Qibla wall. Sometimes simple,